When my sister Leah got married to Jacob, I was very concerned about her humiliation in bed with him the first night. Right? That when he found out who it would be disastrous. So I hid under the bed. I hid under the bed, and I mimicked, I used my voice to mimic, to be her voice, so that she wouldn't be humiliated. And she says, if I can do that, why, God, are you getting so excited about these idols that don't even exist? And he says, for your sake, Rachel, I'll restore Israel. So this is a different religious imagination and a different religious sensibility. And it's very powerful in its own way. It's a very different picture than probably you're coming with. And again, this is not an advertisement, but just an attempt to share it with you. So when you think about love of God as described in Hosea, love is no longer thought of as the adoration of perfection, but much closer to the model of human love relationships, where you don't expect perfection on the other side, but you expect intimacy, where love is compatible with occasional anger and disillusionment, and it's compatible with the struggle to keep the love alive. So there's a 1948 movie called Best Years of Our Lives, that a daughter, 19-year-old or so, is going through this terrible crisis about a relationship, and she's crying with her parents. She's sitting with her parents. They have a good family and good relationships. And she says, why can't it be for me like it was for you? You two have been together forever. You've loved each other. You support each other. And I'm just going through hell. And the mother looks at the father and looks at the daughter and says, if you only knew how many times we had to fall in love again. It's very powerful in the movie, and for me it's a kind of parable about God and Israel, right? That's the picture. At the same time, this is a very unusual love relationship because you don't know a lot about the other side, right? I mean, in prayer, when it works sometimes, I experience a kind of intimacy that's very powerful. And yet, how much do I know about what's on the other side exactly? I mean, it seems to be a kind of religious intuition that you don't know much at all about God in the end. So that part of this kind of Jewish religious imagination I'm describing has a lot of room for not knowing what's going on the other side. There's a Holocaust story, it's maybe a folk tale, Elie Wiesel tells it, about a group of Auschwitz inmates who are put God on trial for crimes against humanity and his chosen people. And he's pronounced guilty. And then one of them gets up and says, okay, let's go, it's time for the afternoon prayers. So this has a lot to do with Jewish religious imagination. Okay, so I got a couple of minutes left. If I have time at the end, I want to say something a little bit about the Old and New Testament. Maybe I won't.
You got about 6 minutes left.
6 minutes. Yeah. Okay. So where does this take us with regard to the topic that we've been struggling with? The Midrash commentary on the beginning of the Akedah raises the question, why in the world, which the text doesn't raise, why in the world did God do this? Okay? Why did he put Abraham through this? What's this about, really? And by way of an answer, it cites the first chapter of Job. Now, the Satan, that's the Hebrew word, is not Satan of the Christian imagination. The Satan is some kind of heavenly prosecuting attorney who wanders around looking for trouble and looking for people who are not where they should be. Okay? So, question is, how did the Midrash bringing that chapter to this context help us, since we don't understand it in the first place? In Job, what's really going on, right? So the psychologist Carl Gustav Jung wrote a book on Job, in which, among other things, he says that the Satan represents God's insecurity. Okay? Now, I don't know how that's going to land on people. but it lands well on me, as you can imagine from the comments I've made so far, right? So one way to think about what's going on is what we're witnessing in Job and the Akedah is what Hartman says he saw in Deuteronomy, which is something very human and lovable in a way, but in a different mode than the adoration of perfection. That's one thought I have about that. I have thoughts about this rather than answers. I don't really know what to say. It's beyond us. It's very big. The other thing is that I was thinking that these two stories, and now this is to shift perspective in another way that may throw light on an answer. I'm not really sure. You could tell me what you think. I feel like they represent some kind of universal, powerful moral situations. What I mean is, maybe imagine it wasn't God in the Akedah. Imagine you read this in a secular mythology something, but it was a short story about someone who has to make a choice. Maybe it's a little like Sophie's Choice or something. You have to make a choice between two values that are non-negotiable for you. Not just morally, but in the deepest human sense. I mean, you're somehow in a moral situation in which there can't be a right answer because, and now I feel like we have things that kind of approach this in our own lives in lots of contexts. They're not exactly the same, and they're not as severe except in extreme cases that in literature. But it's really powerful, and it's very powerful to track Abraham and what he does about it. Some people think he's decided immediately to go with what God wants. I don't think so myself as I read the text. That's a long story, it'll take more than whatever. The story of Job, if you forget the first chapter, which is bizarre, right? Just forget it for a minute. The middle of the book is the classic story of someone who's had everything, probably proceeded with the idea that the world is just and wonderful and goodness is rewarded, and lost it all in the most brutal human way. And he's bereft, and he's angry, and he wants to know what's going on. So both of these stories have tremendous power in this kind of way. They're introduced in God's name, as God as the person who's doing it. I don't know quite how to put this all together. But the power of the story, and Abraham became my hero at a certain point. I mean, the thought of carrying on the way he did, I see him as kind of never deciding what to do, but kind of marching with his head down, with both values intact, and saying, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to march. I can't say no to God, and I can't say no to Isaac, and I'm going to march, and we'll see where it goes. I don't know. So anyway, thank you for listening. This was, I hope that, see, what I wanted to do is shift perspective a little, because I feel like until now I was sitting here thinking the only game is Eleanorian Christianity or the critics. And I felt like I was coming at this from a kind of very, very different perspective, so I wanted to share it. Do we have 2 minutes or not?
You've got 1 minute.
1 minute. Anybody got a thought? Yes.
Yes, I'd like to make a couple of comments. First of all, it's a post-biblical reflection on the mercy of God. 2 stories. One, it observes that the Egyptians are dying, and God says to the angels, my people are dying, and you would sing my praises.
Yeah, so I hear you say a word about this. So it's a midrash, right? It's the angels are cheering and singing in heaven. The war is coming back on the Egyptians and the Jews escaping. And God rebukes the angels and says, how can you sing with my children dying?
And another one.
We're going to have to cut it off there. I'm sorry. Well, since Howie has told me to give you a minute, Professor Crenshaw, I'll do that. Go ahead.
We'll end with this.
All right. This one, when God thought about creating the world, the angel said to him, if you want a world, there can be no justice. If you want justice, there can be no world. The third point I wanted to make is the Oteda. We will return to you, but we don't return. Only Abraham returns. And at the beginning of the story, take, I beg of you, Bin-Khan, your beloved son, and he goes on at one time. There, as even Ezra says, there is imploring, there is entreaty, because God recognizes the heinousness of the request.
It's the word "ma," which is a kind of little word that doesn't mean anything, but you say it, if you please. It wasn't that kind of command.
Well, it's an entreaty. I beg you.
Well, Gary, Dan, and Paul are working their way up here. Let's give our speaker a hand.